Alrighty. The second lesson that we're going to look at in foreign policy issues today is the whether or not the U.S. should accept refugees from nations that are antagonistic to the United States. This issue has been brought up through the Syrian refugee crisis the world is facing, but also has been definitely enhanced with President Trump's travel ban and immigrant bans from nations that are, in many ways, their militaries or their government or their people are in the majority antagonistic to the United States. So let's give a little bit of background on it. The Syrian civil war started in 2011, and it has been bloody. Hundreds of thousands have died. There's been massive destruction of infrastructure like water pipes, hospitals, uh, farms, things that are needed to sustain life in that nation in that region. And as a result of this ongoing war, more than 10 million people have been displaced from their homes and are in need of humanitarian assistance. If you don't have home, you don't have shelter, you don't have food, you don't have water, you don't have sanitation. This is what these refugees are facing. Um, Many of the people have chosen to flee Syria, 4.5 million by some estimates. And much of these refugees are children. Many of them are orphaned. And they have been subject to despicable human trafficking conditions, people looking to profit on their desperation to get out. And we have seen time and time again people crammed into horrible conditions on cargo holds and ships, people put into drowning as their ships capsize, so on and so forth. And the countries in the Middle East and Europe have been struggling to meet the demand of all those seeking asylum. So, the U.S. has been asked by the international community to take more refugees in from the Syrian civil war. But this is a complex war. This isn't just one sided, good, bad. You have many different uh, forces that are combating one another in the Syrian civil war, including the terror group ISIS, which has been actively involved in the region, which has taken large swaths of the region, which has been fighting against the government of President Assad, who is a dictator and has been waging war against his own people and willing to use chemical weapons. So they're fighting him, but also the people of Syria who are pushing initially to put a more democratic form of government in. There's many different facets to it. So the fact that you have these terrorist groups in there and that you have so many people leaving as refugees, terrorists have posed as refugees to get into European countries. They've used the migration routes of refugees. They've tried to disguise themselves as refugees, and they've used this to launch attacks in Europe. And many fear that bringing these refugees in to our country, to the U.S., would be inviting a terrorist attack in the U.S. on our soil. And one of the measures tried to stop this, President Trump has ordered a ban on people from nations that are antagonistic, including Syria, from entering the U.S., including refugees. So the question is, should the U.S. accept these refugees coming from countries, namely Syria and others, that are antagonistic to the U.S. but are facing horrible conditions at home? And the liberal answer is the affirmative. Yes. Yes, we should. The reasons are the following. One, it's the right thing to do for humanitarian reasons. These are people who are desperate for help. These are real people. This isn't just faces on a movie. These are real human beings who have had their homes, their cities, their families ripped apart by war and are desperately looking for a place for the basics of human survival and human rights. And many of these refugees are children who have seen their parents killed, who have no home, who have nothing. And as we see the U.S. now slashing the acceptances of refugees under the Trump administration, coincides with when we see more refugees worldwide than since World War II. World War II, the worst war in human history, a worldwide war, we're seeing refugee numbers worldwide that are similar to that. And we are taking away refugees and turning them away. And historically, this is something that we've done before, and it's had horrible consequences. Refugees from the Holocaust were turned away for anti Semitism. People not wanting to take them in because of fear of Jewish people, which is prejudicial and bigoted and disgusting. And there's a lot of arguments to be made that there is prejudice in not wanting people coming in from areas of the world where Islam is the majority religion, where people are of many different ethnic backgrounds, and turning them away. And liberals would argue, well, one of the main reasons why you're turning these people away is because of prejudice. They also would argue that it's highly unlikely for a terrorist to get past the many different filtrations that we have to stop somebody from getting in. That there's extensive background checks. Homeland Security, U.S. intelligence agencies extensively screen every possible refugee who would come into the country. There is a waiting period before they're allowed to enter. They have to go through all these different background checks and have it validated in order to do that. And no terror suspect has entered the U.S. Successfully as a refugee when we were accepting them. However, the terrorists that did enter the U.S. use other means like student visas, tourist visas. They didn't use the means of being as a refugee. These are usually people who are desperate, including, once again, orphan children of war. And these children are not likely coming here to commit acts of terror. They're looking for a place to have a roof over their head, food in their belly, water to stay alive, and compassion. The liberals are going to argue that accepting refugees is part of our principles. They often would turn to the inscription on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Going back to the ideas of Thomas Paine and common sense that the U.S. should be an asylum who seek refuge from war, from persecution, from oppression, in every form. That the U.S. should be the place where people around the world come to have a chance who are treated unfairly throughout other parts of the world, where we don't have democratic principles, where we don't have protection of human rights. And this has been a big part of our history. And people who have come to the U.S. as refugees have become enormous success stories, have become vital figures in our history. Albert Einstein came to the U.S. as a refugee. Steve Jobs' family came here as Syrian refugees. We wouldn't have iPhones if we didn't give a chance to Steve Jobs' family. Diversity, the liberals will argue, is part of our strength, and accepting refugees is something that makes us stronger. And banning people from certain nations from entering is prejudicial at best and just flat out bigoted at worst. And do we want to stand as a nation that acts on prejudice and fear, or do we want to be a nation that accepts others, standing on our principles? That is the liberal side. Let's get to the conservative side, because they say no, we should not be accepting these refugees from countries that want to damage and harm the United States, where terrorism is protected and funded. We want to take in people from these countries? No, it's just too risky for our national security. What's happening to these people is horrible. It's bad. But we have to protect America first. Allowing refugees from these areas that support terror is putting our people, our lives, our infrastructure at risk. People coming in from countries like Syria, where Bashar al-Assad hates our country, has supported Hezbollah and terrorist organizations. where terrorist groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda are running rampant, letting people in from these nations opens the door from the members of ISIS, of Al Qaeda, of other terrorist organizations, radicalized people to come and attack us. They see our acceptance of refugees as an opportunity, as a weakness, and they want to attack us. So they're going to do anything they can to get into our country to attack us on our soil, including posing as a refugee. No screening process is 100% effective, argue the conservatives. The only way to guarantee that a terrorist does not enter the country is to not allow anyone to enter. You don't want somebody from ISIS who wants to kill millions of Americans getting into the country. Don't accept anybody from the country where they're living. If the country takes in 10,000 refugees and 0.1% of them are radicalized, are people who want to do harm to America, who have extreme terroristic views, that's 10 people. 10 people can do a lot of damage. The Paris attacks, which resulted in horrible deaths in many different areas throughout the streets of Paris, was carried out by 8 people. The 9/11 attacks, which paralyzed our country, which sent us into war, was carried out by 19 people with box cutters. A small group of people can do significant damage, and conservatives will often turn to the M&M analogy. There's a bowl full of M&Ms in front of you. There's 10,000 of them in there. Almost all of them are delicious, but 0.1% of them are poisoned. You gonna take a handful? You gonna eat those M&Ms? You know that most of them are good, but there's a chance that you're gonna get that 1.1% that's poisonous. Is that right? Now you're gonna hear many liberals counter that you're reducing human beings who are suffering to M&Ms, but this is an analogy that is used. Lastly, who are in serious need? We already have a homeless. Veterans who have served in our war who are homeless and traumatized from PTSD and war. We have natural disasters that we are contending with. We have many different things in our nation. People from the U.S. who are here now who need our help. We should help them before we help people from nations who dislike the U.S. and taking them in. We should help Americans first, before we go and start spending our money, our resources, and diverting it away from the U.S. citizens who are in need to people from foreign countries who dislike us, who are. So that's both arguments, enhanced interrogation and the refugee crisis. Post your thoughts on one of the issues discussed in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.